When you've been married for as long as I have, you think you know your partner inside and out. I thought I knew Laura. We had been together for 15 years, raised two amazing kids, and built a life that, by all accounts, should have made us happy. We were the picture of stability, or at least, that's how it appeared from the outside. But if I'm being honest, the cracks had been forming long before the day I found out about the affair. We had just been too busy, too focused on the kids and work and life, to notice that we were slowly drifting apart. It wasn't any one thing. There wasn't a big argument, no life-changing event that threw everything off balance. It was the little things. The way Laura would glance at her phone more often during dinner, smiling at something that I wasn't part of. The late nights she spent working on her charity projects, saying she was too tired for the conversations we used to have. The way she stopped laughing at my jokes, the ones she used to find hilarious. Looking back now, the signs were all there. But at the time, I brushed them off. We were busy, I told myself. Things would get better once work settled down, once the kids were a little older, once we had time for ourselves again. But time never seemed to come. And then, one day, everything changed. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through emails while the boys played in the backyard. Laura had gone out for one of her quick errands, something she did more and more frequently these days. I didn't think much of it. We both had our own lives, and as long as the kids were taken care of, I didn't question how she spent her time. But then her phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I glanced at the screen. It was just a reflex, an automatic response to the sound. I wasn't snooping. At least, that's what I told myself. The message was from Josh. "Can't wait to see you again tonight." My heart stopped. Josh was the son of Laura's best friend, Emma. I had known him since he was a kid. He had grown up with our boys, spent countless weekends at our house. I had watched him become a young man, confident and charismatic. But this message wasn't from the kid I had once known. It was from someone else entirely. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. There had to be an explanation, right? Maybe it was innocent, a misunderstanding. Maybe they were working on something together for the charity. But the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking as I scrolled through the rest of the messages. There weren't many, just a few short texts, scattered over the past week. But each one made my stomach twist tighter. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about it. Let's meet tomorrow. I need you." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. This couldn't be real. Laura wouldn't, she couldn't. Not with Josh. He was practically family. But the messages didn't lie. I spent the rest of that day in a daze, trying to wrap my head around what I had just discovered. Laura came home later that evening, acting as if everything was normal. She kissed me on the cheek, asked how my day had been, and played with the kids like any other Saturday night. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw the phone in her face and demand answers. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear of what I might hear, fear of confirming the worst. Or maybe it was denial, the hope that somehow this wasn't what it looked like. Instead, I kept quiet. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was the message from Josh, burning in the back of my mind. That night, after the kids were in bed, I lay next to Laura, staring at the ceiling. She was asleep, her breathing slow and steady. But I couldn't rest. My mind was spinning, replaying every interaction between her and Josh over the past few months. Had there been signs that I missed? Had I been blind to what was happening right in front of me? I thought about the times Josh had come over to help her with her charity work, how they had spent hours in her office, working on projects. I thought about the times they had laughed together, shared private jokes that I wasn't part of. I had chalked it up to their friendship, to the bond they had formed over the years. But now, it felt like a betrayal. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. "Laura," I said as we sat at the breakfast table, the kids still upstairs. "We need to talk." She looked up from her coffee, her expression cautious. "About what?" I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The moment I had been dreading. "I saw a message on your phone," I said slowly, watching her face for any sign of guilt. "From Josh." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't say anything. "Is there something going on between you two?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then she set her cup down and looked at me, her expression unreadable. "It's not what you think," she said quietly. My stomach dropped. "Then tell me what it is." Laura sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Josh and I have been spending a lot of time together because of the charity. He's been going through a tough time with his mom, and I've been trying to help him. But things got complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Laura, he's a kid. He's Emma's son. What the hell is going on?" She looked away, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Michael. I swear. It just happened." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I stared at her, my mind racing. How could she say that? How could she pretend like this was just some mistake, something that's just happened? "How long?" I asked, my voice cold. Laura wiped at her eyes, her hands trembling. "A few months. But it's over, Michael. I ended it. I didn't want to hurt you." "You didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated, my anger boiling over. "How could you do this, Laura? How could you betray me like this? With Josh, of all people?" "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." But her apology felt hollow, like it wasn't enough to fix what had been shattered. The days that followed were a blur of anger and confusion. I didn't know how to process what I had learned, didn't know if I could ever forgive her. I couldn't look at her without feeling the weight of her betrayal, couldn't be in the same room without wanting to scream. But at the same time, I wasn't ready to walk away. 15 years of marriage doesn't disappear overnight, and part of me still loved her, despite everything. But I knew things would never be the same. The days that followed were like living in a fog. I went through the motions of life, pretending that everything was normal for the kids, but inside, I was unraveling. Laura and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was clipped and tense. She tried to apologize again and again, but every time I looked at her, all I could see was her betrayal, not just of me, but of our life together, our family. At night, after the kids were asleep, I would lie awake, replaying every interaction I had seen between Laura and Josh over the past few months. All those late nights working on projects, for the charity, the way they'd laughed at jokes I wasn't part of. How had I missed it? Was I that blind? I hated feeling like this, powerless, trapped in a situation I didn't know how to escape. I wasn't ready to confront Josh or Emma, and I definitely wasn't ready to make any decisions about our marriage. It felt like everything was happening too fast, like I had lost control of my own life. One evening, about a week after our confrontation, Laura tried to talk to me again. "Michael, can we please sit down and talk?" she asked softly, her eyes red from crying. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to hear more apologies or explanations that wouldn't change anything. But part of me knew we couldn't keep avoiding this conversation forever. I nodded, and we sat at the dining table, the silence between us heavy and uncomfortable. "I don't know how to fix this," Laura said quietly, her voice shaking. "I know I hurt you, and I know saying sorry isn't enough. But I need you to understand that I never wanted to ruin our marriage." "Then why did you?" I asked, my voice harder than I intended. She looked down, twisting her hands in her lap. "I was lost. I don't know when it happened, but I started feeling like we weren't connecting anymore. You were so busy with work, and I felt invisible. And then Josh, he was there, and he made me feel seen." I scoffed, my anger rising. "So what, you were bored and Josh made you feel special? That's your excuse for tearing our family apart." "I'm not excusing it," she said quickly. "I know I messed up. But I need you to know that it wasn't about replacing you, Michael. It wasn't like that. It just happened." I shook my head, unable to comprehend how she could reduce something so destructive to "it just happened." "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked. "You betrayed me. You betrayed our family. And for what? A fling with someone half your age? How am I supposed to ever trust you again?" "I don't know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to make you trust me again. But I want to try. I don't want to lose us." I laughed bitterly. "There is no us anymore, Laura. Not after this." She sobbed quietly, but I felt nothing. The anger inside me had swallowed any sympathy I might have once had for her. I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. I'm going to stay at Dave's for a few days, I said, turning away. I need some space. Michael, please, she started, but I cut her off. But I can't do this right now. I grabbed my jacket and left the house, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. I spent the next few nights at Dave's, trying to clear my head. I told him the basics of what had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to go into detail. He was supportive, offering me a place to stay as long as I needed, but even he couldn't give me the answers I was searching for. I tried to avoid thinking about Laura and Josh, but it was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, laughing, smiling, sharing moments that should have belonged to me. The betrayal felt like a living thing, gnawing away at me day and night. But the worst part was that I didn't know what to do next. Should I confront Josh? Should I tell Emma? The thought of destroying her life, of shattering her image of her son, made me sick. But how could I keep this secret forever? And then there were the kids. Dylan and Leo didn't know what was happening between us yet, and I didn't want to drag them into this mess. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. On the third night at Dave's, I received a message from Emma. Hey Michael, are you alright? Haven't seen you in a while. Everything okay with you and Laura? My heart sank as I stared at her message. She had no idea. I hadn't seen her since I found out about the affair, and I had been avoiding any situation where I might have to face her. I didn't know how to answer her. What could I possibly say? After a long pause, I typed a reply. We're going through some things right now. It's complicated. She responded almost immediately. I'm sorry to hear that. If you need to talk, I'm here. I stared at the screen, torn between guilt and relief. Emma had always been a good friend to both of us, and now I was hiding something that would destroy her. I didn't deserve her kindness, not when I knew the truth. I put my phone down, unable to continue the conversation. I needed to go home. I couldn't hide out at Dave's forever, and sooner or later, I had to face the reality of my broken marriage. When I walked through the door the next morning, the house was quiet. Laura was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes swollen from crying, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked up when I entered, her expression a mix of relief and sadness. Did you stay at Dave's? She asked softly. I nodded, shrugging off my jacket and hanging it by the door. I'm glad you came back, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't come back for you, I said bluntly. I came back for the kids. Laura flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. Not anymore. We need to talk about what's next, I said, sitting down across from her. I can't keep living like this. I don't know if I can forgive you, but we need to figure out what we're going to do. For the kids. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. I know. I'll do whatever you think is best. I don't want to lose our family. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of her words. We were already lost, weren't we? This wasn't something we could just fix with an apology. But I wasn't ready to give up on the boys, on being their father. Let's take it one step at a time, I said finally. We'll figure out what to tell the kids. But I don't want to make any decisions about us until I've had more time to think. Laura nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and desperation. Thank you, Michael. But I didn't feel thankful. I didn't feel anything at all. The next few weeks were a blur of half-hearted attempts at normalcy. Laura and I continued to live in the same house, but we were more like strangers than partners. We went through the motions for the kids' sake, pretending that everything was fine. But the tension between us was palpable, and I knew it was only a matter of time before things came crashing down. I still hadn't confronted Josh. Part of me didn't want to see his face, didn't want to hear whatever excuses he might try to offer. But I couldn't avoid it forever. He was still a part of Emma's life, still a part of our social circle. I would have to face him eventually. And then there was Emma. I hadn't told her the truth yet. Every time I saw her, the guilt twisted in my gut like a knife. She deserved to know what her son had done, but how could I destroy her world the way mine had been destroyed? How could I be the one to shatter the image she had of her son? I didn't know the answers. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. Returning home hadn't brought the relief I'd hoped for. The house was still filled with a heavy, uncomfortable silence that Laura and I both pretended didn't exist. We lived like ghosts, moving around each other in the same space, but never truly engaging. We managed the logistics of life, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the kids, but everything else was left unspoken. I kept telling myself I was staying for Dylan and Leo, but even that felt like an excuse. Deep down, I knew the longer I stayed, the harder it would be to leave. I didn't want to destroy our family, but our family was already crumbling. The cracks had been there long before I discovered the affair. The affair just shattered whatever was left. It was a Wednesday evening when I finally decided to confront Josh. It wasn't a planned decision, just something that snapped inside me after weeks of avoidance. I had been at home, sitting in the living room, trying to focus on a football game that I wasn't even really watching. Laura had gone out again, claiming she needed some space. I didn't ask where she was going or with whom. I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. But then my phone buzzed with a message from Emma. Josh is going to stop by to drop off some stuff for Laura's charity event tomorrow. He should be there soon. Hope that's okay. My stomach churned at the thought of seeing him, but I knew this moment had been inevitable. I couldn't avoid it forever. Part of me had wanted to confront him for weeks, to demand answers, but the other part of me wasn't sure if I could handle whatever excuses he would offer. Now, though, I had no choice. He was coming here, to my home, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. When Josh arrived, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the doorway as he knocked. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home, letting him drop off whatever he needed and leave without seeing me. But I couldn't do it. Not this time. I opened the door, and there he was, taller than I remembered, his face a little more defined, but still the same kid I had watched grow up. That only made it worse. "Hey, Mr. Hale," Josh said, his tone a little too casual for the tension that hung between us. "I'm just dropping off these flyers for Laura," she said. "Come in," I interrupted, stepping aside and gesturing for him to enter. He hesitated for a second, clearly sensing that something wasn't right, but he eventually stepped inside, placing the flyers on the kitchen counter. I closed the door behind him, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't let him leave without addressing what had happened. "Josh," I started, my voice low and controlled, "we need to talk." He froze, turning to face me, and I saw a flash of guilt in his eyes. He knew what this was about. He had to. "About what?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. I stared at him for a long moment, feeling the anger rise inside me again. "You know exactly what this is about." He swallowed hard, his face paling. "Look, Mr. Hale." "Don't," I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't you dare try to make excuses. You knew what you were doing, Josh. You knew it was wrong, and you did it anyway." Josh looked down, his hands fidgeting nervously at his sides. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just happened?" I repeated bitterly. "That's the same bullshit Laura tried to feed me. Do you think that makes it better? That it just happened?" "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why did you go after her? My wife. Emma's best friend. You destroyed everything, Josh. Do you understand that?" He flinched, the weight of my words hitting him hard. "I never meant for it to go this far. I swear. I didn't think." "That's the problem," I snapped, cutting him off again. "You didn't think. You didn't think about me. You didn't think about my kids. You didn't even think about your own mother. What the hell do you think she'll say when she finds out?" Josh's eyes widened in panic. "Please don't tell her. She doesn't need to know. It's over, I swear. I ended it with Laura weeks ago. It's done. Done." I laughed bitterly. "Do you think that changes anything? Do you think that makes this okay?" "No, I know it doesn't," he said, his voice shaking. "But I've been trying to fix things. I've been trying to move on. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I clenched my fists, my anger boiling over. "It's a little too late to fix anything, Josh. You've already done the damage." He stood there, looking like a deer caught in headlights, unsure of what to say next. The sight of him standing there, so young, so lost, made me feel sick. Part of me wanted to hit him, to make him feel the pain he had caused, but the other part of me just felt empty. After a long, tense silence, I finally spoke again. You need to leave. No. Josh didn't argue. He nodded quickly, grabbing his bag from the counter and heading for the door. Just as he was about to step outside, he turned back to me, his face filled with regret. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice trembling. I really am. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just stood there, watching as he disappeared into the night, leaving me alone with the weight of everything that had been shattered. After Josh left, I sat in the kitchen, my head in my hands, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I had finally confronted him, but it didn't feel like a victory. If anything, it felt worse. Hearing him apologize, hearing him try to explain his actions, didn't bring the closure I had hoped for. It only made me realize how much we had all lost. The affair wasn't just about me and Laura anymore. It was about our entire circle, our friends, our families, our kids. Josh's betrayal had rippled through everything, leaving destruction in its wake. And now, I had to figure out what to do with that destruction. The next morning, I woke up feeling more exhausted than I had in weeks. Laura was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. She looked up when I walked in, her expression tense. Josh came by last night, I said, my voice flat. Laura nodded, her eyes filled with guilt. I know. Emma texted me that he was dropping off the flyers. I talked to him, I continued, sitting down across from her. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the cup. What did he say? I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. He said it was over. That he ended it with you weeks ago. Laura closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. He's right. It is over. It doesn't feel over, I said quietly. It feels like everything is still falling apart. She wiped at her eyes, her hands trembling. I know. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. I just want to find a way to fix this. To fix us? I stared at her, my heart heavy with the weight of her words. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that there was still something left to fix, but I didn't know if I could. How do you rebuild trust after something like this? I need time, I said finally, my voice hoarse. I don't know if we can fix this, but I can't make that decision right now. Laura nodded, her face filled with sadness. Take all the time you need. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. But even as she said the words, I wasn't sure if right was something we could ever find again. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on the boys, tried to keep life as normal as possible for their sake. But I knew I couldn't avoid the inevitable. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine with Emma. She had been messaging me more frequently, checking in, asking if I was okay. I could feel the guilt growing heavier with each passing day, knowing that I was keeping the truth from her. I knew I had to tell her. She deserved to know what her son had done, no matter how much it would hurt. But the thought of breaking her heart made me feel sick. Finally, after days of agonizing over the decision, I picked up my phone and called her. I sat in my car, parked outside Emma's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. It was the same house I had visited countless times, for dinners, for holidays, for casual weekends when our families were inseparable. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't here to share a meal or laugh over a glass of wine. This time, I was about to break her heart. I had been sitting there for at least 10 minutes, trying to gather the courage to walk up to the door and ring the bell. I had run through 100 versions of this conversation in my head, but none of them felt right. How do you tell a mother that her son has destroyed everything? How do you tell her that the kid she raised, the one she's so proud of, is the reason your life has fallen apart? There was no good way to do it. No words that could soften the blow. But I couldn't keep putting it off. Emma deserved the truth, even if it would break her. Taking a deep breath, I finally got out of the car and made my way to the front door. Before I could talk myself out of it, I rang the bell. A few moments later, the door swung open, and there she was, Emma, looking as warm and welcoming as ever, with that familiar smile on her face. Michael, she greeted me, stepping aside to let me in. I wasn't expecting you to stop by. Is everything all right? I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. Can we talk? Asked my voice tight. Emma's smile faltered slightly as she noticed the tension in my expression. Of course, she said, closing the door behind me. "Come on in. Let's sit in the kitchen." I followed her into the kitchen, the familiar smell of fresh coffee filling the air. She motioned for me to sit at the table, and I reluctantly did. My hands felt cold and clammy as I fidgeted in my seat, trying to find the right words. "Michael, what's going on?" Emma asked, her voice full of concern. "You're scaring me." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. There was no easy way to say it, so I decided to just get it out. "Emma," I began, my voice shaky, "I need to tell you something. Something that's been eating away at me for weeks." She frowned, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What is it? Is it about Laura?" I nodded slowly, but the words didn't come easily. "It's about Laura and Josh." Her face changed in an instant. The confusion deepened, then shifted into something more like dread. She stared at me, waiting for the rest, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "What about Josh?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to continue. "I found out a few weeks ago that Josh and Laura have been having an affair." The words hung in the air between us like a bomb about to explode. Emma's face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at me as if she hadn't fully processed what I had said. "What?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I couldn't meet her gaze. "I'm sorry, Emma. I didn't want to believe it either, but it's true. I found messages on Laura's phone." I confronted her, and she admitted it. Emma's hands shook as she covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. No, that can't be right. Josh, he wouldn't. Laura wouldn't." "I didn't want to believe it either," I said quietly. "But it's true." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. How could they do this?" I didn't have an answer for her. All I could do was sit there, feeling the full weight of her heartbreak. I had been through the same devastation, the same disbelief, and now I was watching her go through it all over again. Does Josh know that you know?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I nodded. "I confronted him a few days ago. He said it's over now, that he ended it weeks ago." Emma sobbed, her body shaking as she buried her face in her hands. "I can't believe this. I can't believe he would do this." I sat there, feeling helpless. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her something that would make this easier, but there was nothing I could say. The truth was out, and now we both had to live with the fallout. After a few minutes, Emma lifted her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know if I can forgive Laura. I don't even know if I want to try. But right now, I'm just trying to keep things together for the kids." She nodded, sniffling as she tried to compose herself. "I don't know what to do either," she whispered. He's my son, but I don't even know how to look at him after this." We sat in silence for a long time, both of us lost in our own pain. It felt like everything around us had shattered, and now we were left trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces. The next few days were filled with tension I could barely stand. Emma stopped coming around, and I knew why. She was trying to process everything, just like I was, and I didn't blame her for needing space. But her absence only made the weight of the situation heavier. At home, things between me and Laura were just as strained as ever. She tried to act normal for the kids' sake, but I could see the guilt eating away at her. Every time we were alone together, the silence between us was unbearable. Neither of us knew how to move forward. Then one night, everything came to a head. It was late. The boys were asleep, and I was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. Laura walked in, hesitating in the doorway for a moment before finally speaking. "Michael," she said softly, "can we talk?" I glanced up at her, my heart sinking. I wasn't sure I was ready for another conversation. I wasn't sure I could handle it. But I nodded anyway, and she sat down across from me, her hands nervously fidgeting in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she began, her voice shaky. "And I know I've said this before, but I am so sorry for what I've done. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need to know, is there any chance for us?" I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words. Part of me wanted to say yes, to believe that we could somehow rebuild what had been broken. But the other part of me knew that things would never be the same. The trust was gone, and no matter how hard we tried, I didn't know if we could ever get it back. I don't know, I said finally, my voice hoarse. I honestly don't know, Laura. I want to believe we can fix this, but I don't know if I can get past it. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she nodded, as if she had expected that answer. I understand, she whispered. I don't want to give up on us. I don't want to give up either, I admitted, my voice breaking. But I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Every time I look at you, all I see is... She sobbed quietly, her hands covering her face. I wish I could take it all back, she said through her tears. I wish I could undo everything. But you can't, I said softly. None of yous can. We sat there in silence, both of us trapped in the same cycle of regret and pain. I wanted to find a way forward, but every time I thought about trying, I felt that same knot of anger tightening in my chest. A few days later, after another sleepless night, I made my decision. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a marriage that felt like it was held together by nothing but guilt and obligation. I couldn't keep pretending that everything would somehow go back to normal. The truth was, our normal had been shattered the moment I found out about the affair, and no matter how much we tried to patch things up, it would never be the same. The next morning, I sat down with Laura one last time. I've made a decision, I said quietly, my heart pounding in my chest. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. What is it? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I think it's best if we separate, at least for a while. I need space. I need time to figure out what I want, and I don't think I can do that while we're still living under the same roof. Laura's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Michael, please? I'm sorry, I said, my voice shaking. But I can't keep doing this. I need to think about what's best for me and for the kids. She nodded, her sobs quieting as she wiped at her eyes. I understand, she whispered. I don't want to lose you, but I understand. And just like that, the decision was made. The days after our conversation were some of the hardest I had ever experienced. Laura and I had agreed to separate, but making that decision didn't ease the pain of it. Even though I knew it was the right thing to do, the finality of our marriage falling apart weighed heavily on me. We had spent 15 years building a life together, and now, piece by piece, that life was being dismantled. Telling the boys was the hardest part. Dylan and Leo were still too young to fully understand the complexities of what was happening, but they sensed the tension in the house. They could feel the distance between me and their mother, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they started asking questions. One afternoon, after school, Laura and I sat them down in the living room. I had rehearsed what I was going to say 100 times, but when the moment came, I found myself struggling to get the words out. Dylan, Leo, I began, my voice trembling slightly, your mom and I need to talk to you about something important. They looked up at us, their eyes wide with concern. I could see the worry etched on their faces, and it broke my heart knowing that what I was about to say would only add to their confusion. Mom and I have decided that we need to spend some time apart, I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. It doesn't mean we don't love you. We love you both more than anything. But sometimes, grown-ups need to figure out things on their own. Dylan, my eldest, furrowed his brow. Are you getting a divorce? The word hung in the air, sharp and painful. I hadn't expected him to ask it so directly, but he was old enough to understand what was happening, at least on some level. I glanced at Laura, who was on the verge of tears. She nodded for me to continue. We don't know yet, I said honestly. Right now, we're just going to live in separate places for a while. But no matter what happens, you and Leo will always come first. We'll both always be here for you. Leo, who was younger and more sensitive, had tears in his eyes. Are we still going to see you, Dad? I reached out and pulled him into a hug, my heart breaking at the sight of his tears. Of course, buddy. I'm never going anywhere. We'll see each other all the time, just like we always have. Laura wiped her eyes and nodded. We'll make sure you spend time with both of us. Nothing's going to change how much we love you. The conversation was short, but it felt like it lasted a lifetime. When it was over, the boys went to their rooms, leaving Laura and me alone in the living room, both of us feeling the weight of what we had just done. Over the next few days, we began the slow, painful process of separating our lives. Laura moved in with her sister for the time being, and I stayed in the house with the boys. The house felt emptier without her, but in a strange way, it was also a relief. The constant tension had been unbearable, and now, at least, I had space to think, to process everything that had happened. Emma had kept her distance since our conversation. I knew she was struggling to come to terms with the truth about Josh, and I didn't blame her for needing space. The fallout from the affair had rippled through every part of our lives, affecting not just our marriage, but our friendships and the connections we had built over the years. But as the days turned into weeks, something unexpected began to happen. Slowly, bit by bit, I started to feel lighter. The anger that had consumed me for so long began to fade, replaced by something else: acceptance. I hadn't wanted any of this to happen. I hadn't wanted my marriage to fall apart, hadn't wanted to lose my best friend, hadn't wanted to hurt Emma. But it had happened, and now I had to move forward. One Saturday morning, about a month after Laura moved out, I found myself sitting in the backyard, watching Dylan and Leo play soccer. The sun was shining, the grass was green, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a small sense of peace. I knew I wasn't completely healed. The pain of the betrayal was still there, lingering beneath the surface. But I was learning to live with it, learning to let go of the anger and the hurt that had kept me trapped for so long. I still didn't know what the future held for me and Laura. We hadn't talked about divorce yet, but the possibility hung in the air, unspoken but ever-present. We were both giving each other space, trying to figure out what we wanted, trying to figure out who we were without each other. But no matter what happened between us, I knew one thing for sure: I was going to be okay. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. I had survived the worst of it, and now it was time to start rebuilding, not my marriage, but myself. A few weeks later, I got a text from Emma. It was short, just a simple message asking if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I hesitated for a moment before replying. Things between us hadn't been the same since I told her about the affair, and I wasn't sure if we could ever go back to the way things were before. But I missed her. Despite everything, she had been a good friend, and I didn't want to lose that. Sure. Let me know when you're free, I texted back. When we met a few days later at a small cafe near her house, there was an awkward tension between us at first. Neither of us knew how to start the conversation, but eventually, Emma broke the silence. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice soft. "I'm getting there," I said with a small smile. "It's been rough, but I'm starting to feel like myself again." Emma nodded, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About Josh, about Laura, about everything." I nodded, unsure of what to say. I didn't want to rehash the past, but I could see that Emma needed to talk about it. "It's been hard," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I still can't believe Josh did this. I still can't believe any of it." "I know," I said quietly. "It's been hard for me too. I think I'm starting to accept it." Emma looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I think I am too. It doesn't make it any easier, but I guess we just have to move on." We sat in silence for a while, both of us lost in our thoughts. It wasn't the same easy friendship we had once shared, but maybe that was okay. Maybe we were both learning how to move forward, how to let go of the things we couldn't change. Over the next few months, life slowly started to return to some semblance of normalcy. Laura and I kept things amicable for the sake of the boys, and I focused on being the best father I could be. I wasn't sure what would happen between us in the long run, but for now, I was okay with taking things one day at a time. The pain of the past was still there, but it was no longer the thing that defined me. I had been hurt, betrayed, and broken, but I had also survived. And in the end, that was what mattered. I was moving on. Maybe not in the way I had expected, maybe not as quickly as I wanted, but I was moving on. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for watching my videos, sharing them, and supporting me along the way. Your views, comments, and likes are the driving force behind my passion to create captivating and unexpected stories. Every tale I share is more than just a plot. It's a journey of emotions, lessons, and reflections that we experience together. Your engagement brings life and soul to this channel. Thank you for sticking with me until the very end of each video, because the finale of every story is where the real impact lies. I promise to continue delivering twists and turns that surprise, inspire, and resonate with your hearts.